What is going on, Sports Wars? We're here and we are live for some Monday evening quarterback. We were just saying before we started, the slate of games, at least for the NFL, didn't necessarily look super compelling this week. We ended up getting some really good games. And of course, college football on rivalry week, things are going to get insane. And it certainly did shook up the college football playoff landscape a bit. But before we get into the insanity of the NFL and the college football games over the weekend, Fear the Beardo, how you doing, man?
How's it going? Doing pretty good, even though the Giants lost on Thanksgiving to the Cowboys. Cowboys have our number so far, but if we both make the playoffs, it is hard to beat a team 3 times in 1 year. So I still have hopes for my Giants in the postseason, but nonetheless, happy to be here tonight with you guys.
That's what they say. I actually think if you look at it, I think teams that beat someone twice in the regular season have a better chance of winning than losing the third time they play.
Well,
but you can still hold on to that hope, though.
There was the Bucks and the Saints a few years ago, and then the Giants actually when it was the Patriots' undefeated year. The Cowboys were the number 1 seed. Brett Favre and the Packers were the number 2 seed, and the Cowboys had swept the Giants in the regular season. The Giants went into Dallas and beat them in the playoffs. So it has happened before.
There you go. It has happened before, and
yes, it's happened before.
There is a lot of NFC East teams right now that are playoff eligible, meaning all of them if the playoffs started right now. But before we get into that, Robert Barnes from sportspicks.locals.com. How you doing?
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, we had World Cup games go on all week, so it's been NBA games, college basketball games, as well as the last week of regular season college football for the most part, other than Army-Navy coming up this weekend, and a good slate of NFL games. We had money on the Browns to win straight up. We had money on the Jags to win straight up, so those 2 finishes were nice. The Packers game was kind of wild. I don't know if we'll see Aaron Rodgers the rest of the season, depending on how that shook up at the end. But given his injuries, and now there are 8 losses. But it's been a wild year in the NFL. I mean, it's the kind of year where the 2 best quarterbacks have losing records. The Tampa Bay still ahead of their division, but a losing record, and Green Bay on the eve of being out of the playoffs.
Yeah, it's certainly not the season I think we expected at the beginning, but it's turned into an interesting one. And like I said, this is your NFC playoff picture right now, which for so many reasons is interesting. You got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with a losing record in that 4 seed, but the Eagles, the Commanders, the Giants, and the Cowboys, all, if it ended right now, would be in the playoffs, which is kind of crazy to fathom. You got the Vikings, obviously, probably not most people's preseason pick, although still they were solid last year. They were expected to be good again this year, but no one expected Green Bay to be this bad. And of course, San Francisco 49ers with Jimmy G just holding strong, holding steady as the Los Angeles Rams completely fall off a cliff. That's what's happened to their season. So NFC is nuts.
East has gone from the NFC least to the NFC beast in the playoffs. That's impressive.
We're back to that smash mouth NFC East football like we saw in the early 2000s. So it's fun to see.
It is. And yeah, we might as well start with the Aaron Rodgers story because you brought it up. Aaron Rodgers been dealing with a fractured thumb for a decent amount of the season, ever since that Giants game when he tried to do that last second throw. He got tackled. I don't know if it was technically a strip sack or not. It probably was, though, at the end of that game. And he actually was dealing with a broken thumb and a partially torn ligament in the thumb as well. He has another injury that he's dealing with. It happened in the second half, and he was gone. We saw our first love sighting of the Packers, at least for this season. And he looked decent when he was in the game. And now you got to ask the question, after losing to the Philadelphia Eagles, the NFC leading Philadelphia Eagles, what does the future hold for Green Bay and for Aaron Rodgers? And is there even a future there anymore?
Robert?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if I think there is. It's just, should he really play the rest of this season with the kind of injuries he has? I mean, he should get surgery on the thumb. There's rib injuries. There's other injuries. Why risk him for what at this point is a way, way, way long shot to make the playoffs? I get why he was still playing against the Eagles early on, but But once you're at 8 losses, your chances are extremely remote. Even if you run the table, then maybe you get in. I just don't see that as you might as well see what you have in Love. You might as well flash him around the league if you're going to trade him. If you want to keep him and sub out Rodgers, you want to see that as well. So I think Rodgers shows still elite potential, and Watson is starting to develop. Some of these receivers are starting to develop. It just took too long for it to get going this season, and they lost key games that they could not afford to lose early, including the 2 New York games, and then the home games. And so you aggregate that. I don't see why you keep playing him this year. I think you let him get the surgery, you let him go rehab, see what you have in Jordan Love, show the league what you have in Jordan Love, use him either as trade bait to improve your wide receiver core, maybe go out and get a vet for the next season so that you're not just relying on a bunch of rookies. That experiment backfired on the general manager. Or if you really like it, then you let Rodgers move on and you elevate Love. But you might as well play Love the rest of the year at this point, given that it's an extreme long shot they make it back in. No reason to risk Rodgers' health further, and you might as well find out what you have in Love.
I completely second that with what Robert said. There's almost no point to have Rodgers play the rest of the season just with the injuries. And, yeah, find out what you have in Jordan Love. Gudikeg, their manager, their general manager, you might as well show off what you saw in Jordan Love. Go ahead and show him off if you do want to trade him or if you do want to go forward with him. And then, pretty much everything that Robert just said. If Rodgers wants to get traded or if he's going to retire, who knows? The Green Bay Packers, their future is a huge question mark. But I think that Rodgers, the frustration that he showed visibly through several games this season with their wide receiving core, with just the fact that their best player, Aaron Jones, has been nearly absent on the field, trying to push that A.J. Dillon project. Packers are a huge question mark. So why not go with Jordan Love? Whether if you want to trade him or go forward with him, I completely agree with everything Robert just said.
Yeah, I think the question is, what does Aaron Rodgers want to do? And I think at the end of the day, even if you don't know what the future holds, you might be kind of held hostage by what Aaron Rodgers wants to do. So if Aaron Rodgers says, hey, I want to tough it out, I want to go out there and I want to play, at least until we're eliminated from the playoffs, can you deny him that? Has he earned that? What do you owe this guy, especially with the future up in the air? Those are very tough things that the Packers are going to have to navigate. And, they still had a chance at the end of this game. I can't believe that it ended up being a 40-33 or something by the end of this game. Really high scoring. The Eagles put a lot of points on the board, but the Packers certainly gave up a lot of points as well. The Eagles defense gave up a lot of points to the Packers. So some work to be done on both sides of the ball, certainly for the Green Bay Packers. But super chat we got from Spider Limited for 5. Cox burned the Tigers, and the Jets finally have a quarterback. We may as well talk about those Jets after making the decision. Zach Wilson in a press conference basically saying, yeah, I don't feel like I let anybody down after performing pretty horrendously the past several weeks for the Jets. Robert Saleh made the decision. All right, you're done. We're bringing in the other guy. And the other guy had a hell of a game. 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. And now, I don't know how many people in New York want to see Zach Wilson again. I think they're pretty comfortable with the guy who's back there right now.
Not only did they bench Zach Wilson, he didn't even dress. It wasn't even a question. He wasn't going to touch the field with any circumstance that were to happen yesterday against the Bears. Zach Wilson was not going to touch the field regardless, and that's a huge, huge message to the fans, New York Jets fans, and say, hey, we're pretty much done with this guy. And Mike White solidified that the Jets are moving on from Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson's career in New York is done and over. He's probably looking at a long career ahead of being a backup. But yeah, Mike White balled out, and a lot of people point to last year when Zach Wilson had an injury and Mike White played in that first game Mike White had last year where he did the same thing. He balled out, and then he had a few lackluster games, had a 4-interception game. If Mike White were a first-round draft pick, a top 10 draft pick, that 4-interception game would have been overlooked by now. But it's just the fact that he's such a question mark. He's a backup. He's a reserve quarterback. So, he threw 4 interceptions. This probably isn't the guy. but you give Mike White enough time, kind of like the Taylor Heineke project going on in Washington. Hopefully the Jets handle this Mike White situation better than Washington has handled Taylor Heineke, and give Mike White full control. He's a good game manager, played well yesterday. I'm a fan of Mike White.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely played well. I mean, the Bears also had their backup end, Trevor Siemian, and the Bears didn't do much, and the Jets did pretty much everything they wanted to do. But yeah, I mean, personally, I'm skeptical of quarterbacks who have been in the league 4, 5, 6 years, have a good game, as to whether that's sustainable. For every Kurt Warner there is who gets discovered, there's a lot more very average guys who revert to being average once teams see them on film, really prep well, etc. Though it was interesting. I mean, this also may reflect on the Bears' defense, but it was like they knew all week it was going to be Michael White in all likelihood, and they didn't appear to prep at all for his performance, or maybe he just really excelled and was waiting for a second chance to do well. So personally, I'm skeptical that he will sustain the success we saw this past Sunday. But wish him the best of luck.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Everybody does point to that. And people also got to remember in that Colts game, I think was the one that he got taken out of. He had like an injury in it where his arm went numb or something effectively. He just had no feeling. So by the time that game was over, it returned. But again, they didn't invest as much in him as they had in other people on that team. Now, I've heard for what Ian Rappaport has said that they want to work Zach Wilson back in, that they're not giving up on him entirely. However, if Mike White's playing like this, you can't really do anything. You know, you got to let this guy roll if he is rolling. I think they really wanted to send a message to Zach Wilson, and in the midst of sending a message, they may have gotten themselves into a quarterback controversy, but that can be a good thing. Jerry Jones sat there and said that exact same thing when Cooper Rush was playing. He's like, you know what? I'd be glad to have a quarterback controversy because that means I got two guys that are playing well. And not exactly the case for the Jets with Zach Wilson right now, to be sure. But we shall
Luckily
see.
for the Jets, Zach Wilson is still on a rookie contract. For Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, they're paying Dak a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of Wilsons who have been a disappointment, I mean, we have to talk about Russell Wilson. It looks like tempers are finally flaring up for the Broncos, not just behind the scenes, but even on the field. You saw players blowing up at Russell Wilson on the sidelines. Once again, this team can't produce more than 15 points. They ended up scoring 10, I think, with a garbage time touchdown against the Carolina Panthers with Sam Darnold. What an embarrassment, and Russell Wilson just continues to be the laughingstock of the league.
Yeah, I mean, that was a bitter one for me because I had the over 35. I mean, one of the lowest totals in the history of the NFL. Carolina puts up 23, so I literally just needed 13 points from Denver, and they couldn't make it. They couldn't make it to 13 points. This has got to be the worst performance of a quarterback that's been a previous MVP candidate I've ever seen in the history of the NFL. This is almost this is to mind-numbing territory of how bad he has been. And, of course, it looks terrible that Geno Smith, it looks great in Seattle. And even though they lost in overtime to the Raiders, it wasn't because Geno Smith or the offense couldn't put up points because they put up 34. So it really is I'm trying to remember a quarterback with this much notoriety, this much fame, this much recognition, these many successful seasons who transferred out and just completely imploded. I mean, there's been guys that were flash in the pan guys, a Matt Castle, Alex Smith, who, mostly had mediocre seasons and then had one or two good seasons, usually with a guy like, Reed, and then didn't perform great at their new location. I can't remember a guy that had, many years of Pro Bowl caliber quarterbacking go in and now be one of the worst quarterbacks in the league and create maybe I don't know if anyone's checked, but it's got to be close to the worst scoring record that the Broncos are going to set in the number of games that they have failed to break 20 points. I mean, I can't remember the last team that can't. I mean, Vegas can't put the number low enough. They can't get over it.
Yeah, and I don't think maybe if somebody comes back and it's like, oh, remember this time in 1993 where this guy did this? I don't know if we've ever seen a quarterback who was on a Hall of Fame trajectory And I think that's fair to say for somebody like Russell Wilson, a Hall of Fame trajectory,
Yeah.
a guy who won a Super Bowl, went to another one, put up big fucking numbers. And in the prime of his career, this is not somebody who's 39 years old, right? And you expect him to fall off a cliff. This is a guy who is still in his prime. We've never seen somebody have a drop-off like this. And it certainly seems like the people, like his teammates in Seattle, are happy to see this happen. They expected to see something like this. Like they knew all along that this is the guy that Russell Wilson truly was.
His game has completely changed. He was never this pocket passer, and for some reason, some delusion, Russell Wilson all of a sudden convinced himself and others, the Denver Broncos, that he's a pocket passer. He was never a pocket passer. Yeah, he showed glimpses and flashes of throwing, a nice deep ball. He throws a nice ball on a rope, but his game was always, if you needed to get 6 yards on a 3rd and 6 to get a first down, he could just easily just run it to the sideline and pick up that first down. He was a good scrambler. He could pick up the first down on his feet and just completely overnight, it seems like, just changed his game. He is now a pocket passer, and that's never what he was. And the Denver Broncos paid him a whole bunch of money because of this delusion that his game has changed, that he's just been this great pocket passer, and he's never been that. And it's starting to show now because he's not playing the game like he used to before. He's not scrambling out for those first downs any longer. He goes through his progression and then either throws it away or takes a sack. Or it's unbelievable to see this type of delusion from Russell Wilson. And it also makes it worse, his social media cringe, just the TikToks and the Twitter videos. It makes it all the much more cringe, and just the praying in the middle of, like, I'm a religious guy. I'm not going to knock a guy for praying, but when you stand out with 10 cameras around you in the logo and you're just praying in the middle of the field, and then you just go out perform like that, it's a bad look.
He was praying to the wrong God.
That's certainly true. I heard Sierra's looking back at future like, I think I missed out. But when you look at that game in Seattle, when you look at the fact that these former teammates of Russell Wilson got invited back, it certainly doesn't seem like they had invited back to him on. The things that Pete Carroll said in that press conference about it was good for people to finally see this, that like turned some heads. These guys all knew that this is who this guy was. Now, in terms of him never being a pocket passer, yeah, he's not a traditional pocket passer. His strength was always, in his ability to extend the play a little bit. I wouldn't call him a rushing quarterback by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. But he was always a guy who could extend plays, who could extend plays in the back, who could shake off somebody, let somebody create downfield.
You know what offense he'd be great in? It would be the San Francisco-style offense that's working in Miami for Tua. But he didn't want anybody to think of him that way. He wanted people to think of him as Tom Brady. And it's like he was never Tom Brady. He wasn't Tom Brady when he was at NC State. He wasn't Tom Brady when he was at Wisconsin. And both of those schemes, what he was unique about him was his ability to throw well on the run outside of the pocket. It wasn't just his ability to scramble for some yards here or there. It was this guy had a beautiful deep ball, and that when it turned to chaos, he turned good. Now he doesn't want there to be any chaos. Well, he's not any good when there's not any chaos. And that's what the whole world is saying. And a couple of years ago, some defenses schemed up. I forget which one it was. It might have been Houston. I forget. It was somebody that he threw like 4 picks against that Pete Carroll realized, I got to adjust. It was when he was having that huge year. Everybody was talking about MVP, setting records, et cetera. Then all of a sudden he had a game or two. And I'd followed the people that do a lot of game breakdown, and they were pointing out defensive adjustments that were being made that were going to cause Wilson trouble the rest of the year, and it did. And then it caused him trouble the next year. People figured out how to defend him, that you just take away that deep ball and make him throw between the hashes in the pocket on a consistent basis on timing. And he doesn't do that well. And he kept deluding himself that he did. And this is someone whose ego far outreach. But I don't blame him having a crazy ego. That's the nature of professional sports. I blame Denver for not realizing the problems this guy had when giving him a $250 million contract.
Yeah, this is not just that. You also gave up picks. It'd be one thing if you just signed this guy as a free agent, but you didn't. You gave up a lot to get him, and you gave him $250,000. And now everyone in Denver who were desperate, they've been desperate for a quarterback. They had Peyton Manning for a couple years, but they have not been able to really find that guy. They've been constantly searching for this replacement, a long-term replacement. They thought they had him. They absolutely don't. At least it doesn't look like right now. And Denver fans are mad, and they have a right to be so. It's pretty horrendous.
Let's be honest. It's hard to come off the quarterback apex of the great Tim Tebow. They haven't recovered since then.
That's true. They almost did. Who is the guy that filled in for Peyton Manning, who played better than
Brock Osweiler?
Osweiler. Brock Osweiler was better than Peyton Manning that year. They won the Super Bowl.
Yeah. He was perfect in that Kubiak. Like, that's an offense that Russell Wilson would excel in, because that Kubiak offense, like, look at what this done for Cousins. Cousins is a guy that could be up and down, gets in that Kubiak-style offense in Minnesota, excels consistently. They've continued to run a variation of that, and he's continued to do well this season. Because there's certain, like you see with Tua. I mean, Tua was a guy we thought might be out of the league in a year or two, given how he was playing. Then he wasn't even backup material, given how bad he had been at times from a statistical profile. They bring in the San Francisco style offense, and he's putting up a Pro Bowl stats. If you sacrifice ego to show where you excel in, Russell Wilson would still be excelling. His ego got the better of him, but his ego got the better of the Denver Broncos general management.
Yeah. I see some people bringing up Cam Newton as like a similar player. I would say Cam Newton didn't have the sustained success that Russell Wilson had.
He was kind of average, decent. Then he had that one
season.
great.
He had an MVP season early on in his career, and it was a monster season. There's no doubt about that. But he never really replicated any of that success. Kind of like you look at, like, Matt Ryan had an MVP season too.
Right.
But were any of those guys on a Hall of Fame trajectory? I don't know.
No,
I wouldn't say so.
Cam Newton suffered severe injuries. He had that one back injury. He broke his back in that really bad car accident.
Yeah.
And then he had like a foot calf injury that sidelined him for a long time. And he was just never the same after that. Russell Wilson has never had like a season-ending injury like that.
No. And when he had the injury, he still came back and played decently at times. He had some, the last season he was in Seattle. But the other difference was Newton was always an athlete, a great athlete playing quarterback who relied upon his great running ability to give him that ultimate threat. A little bit like Michael Vick in that respect. But Wilson put up stats that we hadn't, none of those guys had, year in, year out. And, again, Super Bowl winner, almost another Super Bowl winner. And now, now that he's discovering the hard way that the question is, how long does his ego dominate? This Denver coach is going to lose his job unless he somehow forces a change.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what Denver's going to do. Something has to change. I don't think they can move away from their quarterback. So maybe you do make a change at head coach. But speaking of running quarterbacks, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, and just yet another late game lead given up by the Baltimore Ravens, which a little bit not stereotypical for the John Harbaugh-led Ravens. It seems like it's a problem this year and has been in a couple games. And they end up losing. They go down to Jacksonville, which, give them credit, Jacksonville played great. Trevor Lawrence played great at the end of that game to march down the field the way he did. And they're a team that's been in more games than their record would indicate. But they got the better of the Ravens at the end of this game.
Yeah, Doug Peterson continues to have that team improving. There's more chemistry with Marvin Jones. Even with when Etienne got injured earlier in the game, they're able to run decently with the backup because, of course, they let Brian Robinson go. So they're on third string running back now. But we're still continuing to see not quite the development I wanted to see, but improvements over last season. A very mentally tough team, and credit to Peterson going for two. Like, he's like, I'm not risking overtime with the Ravens. I want to win it right now.
Yep.
And they still, Justin Tucker got a chance at setting a new record of a 67-yard field goal, and he was only maybe 2 or 3 yards short. If they'd got a little bit more, he would have broken the hearts in Jacksonville with like a 64-yarder outdoors. That would have been something to watch. But credit to Jacksonville for a tough ability to sort of eke it out. And what we're seeing is, the Ravens defense with some of those key new personnel, not yet quite fully consistently blending yet, but will probably get better as playoffs approach.
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence had some very clutch throws, some deep balls that were just on the money. Lawrence looked very good yesterday. He was commanding that offense, very promising for his career after, just the complete failure that was the Urban Meyer-led Jacksonville Jaguars last year. This is kind of almost Trevor Lawrence's real rookie season, like with a competent head coach. And for Baltimore, those few early drives where they had 3 great drives to start the game, and then they just resulted in field goals, and then you lose by 1 point. So you think obviously you want to score a touchdown, but those 3 key drives and they all resulted in field goals. Can't have that.
Yeah, and Lamar Jackson even vented his frustrations on Twitter the day after, or I think after the game. He ended up deleting a tweet where some guy came after him and said, if somebody wants $250 million, they shouldn't have games coming down to Justin Tucker, which is, ludicrous. Games are always going to come down to field goal kickers at times. There's no doubt about that in a 17-game season. Lamar Jackson said, coming from a guy who's never smelt a football field and the only thing he's good at is eating dick. That's what Lamar Jackson responded. And I had to go search it up because some news outlet said a homophobic phrase or something that he uttered. And it's like, come the fuck on. But he did delete that tweet. John Harbaugh was forced to address it today. But can't be happy. And the Ravens, that is the elephant in the room. Lamar Jackson is not signed to a long-term extension. Lamar Jackson wants to get paid. He's made that perfectly fucking clear. They can franchise tag him a couple times if they want. I don't think that'll help out their relationship at all. But what do the Ravens do, after this season? I think that's a big question going forward. And I don't know. I don't know if fans are going to be happy with the results.
I think that they need to go back and get an elite deep threat receiver. Banking on Andrews to be your number one guy all the time is asking a little much. And what makes Lamar Jackson so dangerous is not just his unique running ability, or what made that offense so explosive is when they had a real true deep threat. Because when you can stretch that defense, then you've got to worry about containing Jackson, and you got to worry about Andrews over the middle, and you got to worry about a guy getting behind you. When you have those 3, that offense is explosive. You remove one of those 3, it's going to be an erratic offense. And that's what they really need to fix, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting to see what happens for sure. Mm-hmm. Got to talk about Tom Brady, because Tom Brady, who was undefeated since his divorce, took his first L, and that was against the Cleveland Browns in overtime. A little bit strange ending to the regular to the fourth quarter when they decided that they were going to, slow play it, because they had one play that they decided not to call a timeout, not to hurry up, just take their time. It certainly seemed like they could have got a little bit more out of that, but they were trying to play it safe and end up going to overtime and losing. And that's one of the problems you can certainly face. The Bucs didn't look great. This Browns team continues to compete, and this is probably the last time we see Jacoby Brissett at least starting a game, because Deshaun Watson is ready and waiting, and he will be back against the Texans.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Browns really needed this in order to still be in the playoff hunt when they get Deshaun Watson back. And so the credit to them for finding a way to eke out a win. I think, and the Tampa offense is still just not explosive. I mean, that's what stands out to me. It's like, Brady seems to still be Brady. It's like those mid New England years when they were, 24 points a game kind of team. They weren't an explosive offense, solid, consistent, but not explosive. And whatever it is, the explosiveness is not there for it is, whether that's because their running game has been so inept, that the play action isn't effective, whatever it is. This is a solid Tampa team, but if they weren't in the NFC South, they would be out on the outside looking in right now because they have a losing record.
Yeah, it still boils down to a few things that we were worried about in the beginning of the season. All of the key injuries on their offensive line that they suffered during the preseason. And then obviously the loss of Gronk. Gronk is Brady's guy. He always has been. And, we were worried about that at the beginning of the season, and that proves true today, that those are their key issues, just poor offensive line play and Brady not having enough weapons. And then, this is the result. And as far as the Browns, perfect situation for the Browns still being in the playoff hunt, because they could be in a situation like the Green Bay Packers where if they were out of the playoffs, why even play Watson this year? You paid this guy all this money, guaranteed money. You're out of the playoffs. Why risk putting him on the field to suffer any kind of injury? So the fact that the Browns are in the hunt still, now you get to see your guy that you paid all that money for.
Yeah, I think that Jacoby Brissett's done as good a job as you could reasonably expect from who he is. Granted, he made some big mistakes late in some games early on in this season. The Browns could easily have 2 more wins, but at the same time, I think he's performed, better than a lot of people expecting, kind of at least kept them around, 4-7. You do have an outside shot at that point, for the playoffs potentially. We'll see. But two AFC teams who seem like they're going to meet each other again. That's just the way this game was played and the way they feel and the tensions. That's just the way that this game felt. The Cincinnati Bengals do go into Tennessee and beat the Tennessee Titans on a game that could have ended up a lot different if certain things went a certain way. Even a penalty that gets called at the end of the game that would have resulted in, the Bengals going up by a touchdown, Tennessee getting the ball back. That ends up ending the game because that field goal gets taken off the board. They're just able to kneel it out. But I think that with the loss of Jamar Chase, the Bengals have certainly turned this thing around. Didn't even have Joe Mixon in this game, but the ability to spread the ball around, for Joe Burrow to eliminate some of these big mistakes, to utilize these running backs, whether handing the ball or out of the backfield, I think it's been a big thing for this team.
It definitely felt like there was a lot of bad blood in this game too, from last postseason. Just the way that game ended with Tannehill throwing a pick to end that game. These two teams do not like each other, and there was the one Bengals player yesterday who was literally running off the field after the game, telling the Titans fans to go fuck themselves. It was awesome. But yeah, I mean, you got to think just the way that the Bengals are still playing pretty decently well. Without Jamar Chase, without Joe Mixon, it's scary to think that by the end of the regular season, going into the playoffs, when they get those two guys back, could they make another run at it?
Yeah, and they defensively schemed really well. Hemmed in Henry, who had been on a great roll. The Tannehill actually put up some big stats. I mean, almost 300 yards. The passing game was back to clicking, which it had to in order to counteract the effect that they were having on containing Henry. They probably still should have fed Henry a little bit more, just because he's just one of those guys you have to keep feeding, even if it's not working, until it does work, because once he gets rolling, he gets rolling. But big win for Cincinnati, and a key offensive improved performance that they need going down the backstretch of the season. And we're seeing that defensive creativity that they showed a lot last year. They're not stacked with talent defensively, but they do have a lot of guys that can play 4 or 5 different roles in that defense. And that's what allowed them to go on that great run, famously shut down Mahomes in the second half of the playoffs. So we're seeing the nobody had recent success the last 3 or 4 games, really, with any consistency against Henry. They go into Tennessee and take Henry out. So that's showing that ability once again. And if they get those two peaking at the right time, they could easily make another Super Bowl run.
Yeah, I think it definitely feels different now than it did, say, 5 weeks ago when this Bengals team was struggling, when they were just taking sacks left, right, and center. They've made adjustments, and that's what needs to happen. It's good for a young coach like Zach Taylor to do that, and I think undoubtedly that's what they've done. Speaking of another coach who's still pretty young, Cliff Kingsbury, there seems to be some tension in Arizona, to say the least. They signed both these guys to contract extensions, both Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, in the offseason, albeit, Kyler Murray's was with the caveat of, hey, make sure it's in this contract that you have to actually study. You have to actually do work outside of just on the field. They took that out because that's so racist, obviously. But now it seems like maybe they would have wanted to leave that in there, as yet again, the Arizona Cardinals come up short. Now, it did take a 2-point conversion, a pretty fucking gutsy call by the Los Angeles Chargers to do that, but they do come away with the victory over the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray has been banged up the past few weeks. In the post-game press conference, he expressed some problems, like schematically, with what they'd been doing. Now, whether that was just referring to one specific play call or just in general, a little bit of a shot at Cliff Kingsbury and what they're doing, it certainly seems like it's tense, to say the least, in Arizona.
I can't see, if they don't make the playoffs, I don't see Kingsbury back for another year, is my take.
Agreed. Yeah.
That takes, that's a big deal for them to sign him to a contract extension, move on from immediately. But, I guess what do? You gave Kyler all this money. You're giving Kyler a lot of fucking money, so you got to have somebody that makes it work. I don't know if somebody else is going to be able to come in there and not have the tension. I think that Kyler Murray is just a disagreeable, like argumentative personality where he's always going to have a fucking problem with everything. That's how I feel about Kyler Murray. I don't have anything to justify that other than impressions, other than what I see from him, not only on the field, but in interviews and things like that. That's just the way it seems. So even if you move from Cliff, I don't know if it works out personality-wise with anybody else.
Maybe Lincoln Riley leaves USC and goes to Arizona.
Ugh. Could you imagine? Like, I don't know. I want to see Lincoln Riley at USC for a little while longer, at least. But yes, that'd be pretty nuts. But what do you guys think about this game and how this game ended up, and what do we have for the future with Arizona here?
Yeah, I mean, I had Arizona on the money line and the point, so I was a little bit bitter about that 2-point conversion, but couldn't complain too much because the earlier Jacksonville 2-point conversion gave me the win in that game. That also had Jacksonville on the money line, and Arizona looked good throughout large parts of the game. This Chargers it's interesting how much this Chargers defense. Granted, they had some key injuries, but this was supposed to be the defensive guru, and increasingly, I've been skeptical of defensive gurus in the NFL. I think the last legit one was Rex Ryan. All these other guys, it's like it's usually more personnel or luck, is my view. I mean, a lot of them are quality. I just don't think there's a big gap between them and their replacement on average in the NFL. And we're seeing it with Brandon Staley, not have with the Chargers not be able to put up an elite level defense with any consistency. Because this is an Arizona offense that wasn't exactly blowing the doors off anybody, with or without Kyler Murray. So I process that. It's good to have Justin Herbert. I mean, that guy has been money in the bank in the clutch. So give him his due. I give him credit for going for it at the end, going for 2 at the end. To get the win. I thought that was the right smart move for them to make. But otherwise, I don't see this Chargers team in the playoffs. I'm sorry, I don't see the Cardinals team in the playoffs. And the Chargers are going to have to eke their way in because of how competitive the AFC is. But they might be able to do so on the back of Justin Herbert, who's going to be like the Dan Fouts of the old San Diego Chargers.
I mean, shit, it's about time that the Chargers are actually winning games. I mean, besides the Los Angeles Rams, the Chargers are probably the second most disappointing team this season after the preseason projections of who we think is going to be the teams going forward in the playoffs, the new powerhouse of the NFL. The Chargers had a very high ceiling going into this season, and they have just not lived up to those expectations. So, yeah, it's about time. Justin Herbert's supposed to be the guy, and Justin Herbert is a very athletic, talented quarterback, another guy who can extend plays with his feet. So, it's about damn time that the Chargers are showing up and actually winning games.
Yeah, I think they obviously have had some pretty key injuries. When you look at Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, those are the guys that make that roll, that make that offense click, to have Keenan Allen running across the center of the field, Mike Williams going deep. And so they have struggled. And even Justin Herbert himself got injured. I think he had that game where he had the ribs or whatever it was. It seemed like he could barely go out there and throw against the Chiefs, and he still was fighting. So they're clawing, they're scrapping and clawing. They're 6-5. The last couple seasons we've seen them. I think they were 7-9, and then 9-8 in the first 17 game season. So now we'll see if they continue to make those steps forward and improve. But you're right, that like a lot of people thought this team would take the next step this year. And we've yet to see that. We've yet to see the consistency. Maybe now that these guys are starting to get healthy, maybe it's at just the right time for them to head in and make a big playoff run. And then a game that ended in crazy fashion. And Josh Jacobs had himself a career day. And he basically ended it the way he started, with a massive big touchdown run in overtime to end this game in Seattle. And the Raiders, ever since Derek Carr cried, they've not lost. So, I mean, there you go. Russell Wilson, I guess maybe it's time that you force some tears out up there on the podium.
Well, it always reminds me of Cordell Stewart. Remember they had those dolls that said "Pull him and he cries." Back when he cried years ago for the Steelers, and people were doing that in the crowd and the rest. But hey, it works for the Raiders. This is back-to-back overtime wins, not just wins, but on the road, back-to-back overtime. Beat the Broncos, then turn around and beat the Seahawks. Good offensive performances really in both games. Josh McDaniels really needed this, given that he was managing to get himself on a hot seat in his first ever season there because of his prior head coaching stint going so badly. I think there was a little bit more scrutiny there, and blowing 3 17-point leads, which was, it set a recent modern day NFL record. it was good. It's good to see the Vegas. I mean, the memes were already circulating in Vegas. They were showing pictures of the Vegas stadium and saying, "Meet the only house in Vegas that loses." So I mean, stuff like this is not the kind of memes you want in the home crowd. So so good to see the Raiders get off the schneid and get back into at least playing some decent, respectable football. And winning some of these close games. And Josh Jacobs, wasn't he another one of those Alabama backs? He was like running back number 5 on the list or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
How much absurd talent did Nick Saban have down there?
Oh,
but it was a good win. And again, Geno Smith keeps playing well. I mean, Cricket of Sports Picks has Geno for preseason as the NFL Comeback Player of the Year. He had like some ridiculous odds, and of course he's going to cash that ticket at this point.
Yeah, he's been such a surprise to so many people. Go ahead, Beardo.
I was going to say either Geno or Saquon for comeback player of the year, but I mean it's about time. Another team it's about time that the Raiders are going to do something. They go out and they get Devontae Adams, the perfect match with Derek Carr, the college best friends, college roommates. They both played at Fresno State together. This is Derek Carr's match made in heaven, getting Devontae Adams, and then the Raiders were really backed into a corner here because I'm not sure if we talked about it on a Sunday stream or on this stream before. The Raiders financially cannot fire Josh McDaniels. They cannot do it. They cannot afford to fire him, pay out his guaranteed money, and then go ahead and hire another head coach. They financially cannot afford it.
Because they're still paying John Gruden.
Yeah, they cannot do it. So they were really backed into a fucking corner there. Like, what the hell do we do if this guy doesn't pan out? Like, we can't. We have to stick with him for another two years after this. Not just this year. Another 2 years after this, they have to do it. So Josh McDaniels has no choice, or the Raiders actually, Mark Davis has no choice but for Josh McDaniels to succeed. So it's about time. And shout out to Derek Carr for shedding a few tears. Apparently that's what he needed to do. Good for the Raiders. I do have a soft spot for Derek Carr, so I'm glad that they were able to pull out a tough one the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And now when we look at tonight's game, I got to say this is one of the least interesting Monday Night Football games we've had. At least that I can think of this year. You got the 3-7 Steelers against the 4-6-1 Colts. Mike Tomlin versus Jeff Saturday. This has got to be, when I look back at the Steelers, this has got to be one of the worst Mike Tomlin seasons ever. I think there's a period of time there where he never had a season under 500. Right. I don't know if that was the case last year with Ben, kind of being gone and like things like that, but certainly probably a low point of Mike Tomlin's career there in Pittsburgh. What do you guys think happens in this game tonight?
I mean, I assume Matt Ryan's starting, and I think the Colts are 2.5-point favorites. A little bit of a slight, that you normally see a home favorite by 3 or more. You don't see it get under a field goal like this, but that's whether it's disrespect for Matt Ryan or respect for Tomlin on the road, or I don't. Is Kenny Pickett going to be the guy starting for the Steelers tonight?
I would have to imagine that's been their guy, in the game
on the road. I would lean Colts. I mean, they got Jonathan Taylor back. Matt Ryan seemed to be playing decent enough. Saturday seems to have an instinctive feel for this team. I mean, they've had 2 good back-to-back games. They didn't win them last week, but they probably should have against the Eagles. They did go into the Raiders and smack them around. That caused all that crying by Derek Carr. So I would lean towards the Colts holding it out. But I don't know who Monday Night Football's ticked off over at the league because they've scheduled some of the worst Monday night games Monday night slate I can remember in a while.
I don't know if this one would be that, like, beginning of this season, I don't think anyone expected the Steelers to do much. But the Colts, to be fair, were predicted, to have a good season. With a team that should have been in the playoffs last year with Carson Wentz, bringing in Matt Ryan, Jonathan Taylor, like this defense. On paper, a lot of people had the Colts making a run this year, and certainly hasn't turned out to be that way. Now, they're not out of it completely. They're 4-6-1, but they fired their head coach. They've made a quarterback change, then another quarterback change back to the guy before. Not the team people thought they would have.
I think tonight, like what Robert said, Jonathan Taylor's back. And the key factor in all of this is, of course, the future winningest coach in Colts history, Jeff Saturday, the GOAT. He's fantastic. He's going to be the best coach in Colts history. You can't bet against him. I have the Colts tonight all day.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if he falls to a 333 all-time win percentage or a 667. Yeah, this will be a big game determining the future for Jeff Saturday's winningness as a football coach. There's no doubt about that. But we got a couple super chats. Chris Coran for 5. Please let's not talk about Brady. We sucked yesterday. Not looking forward to the next few games. Yeah, if I was a Bucks fan, it's rough. It's been a rough go this season for sure, Chris. And then Prince Lethal for $2, 200K. Ooh, woo, gay boy. Thank you, Lethal. Yes, I did hit 200,000 subs on my channel, so I appreciate that. I'll be doing a stream at some point tomorrow. I'll do a little celebration, but thank you, Lethal. I appreciate it. Now moving on to college. Obviously, we knew this was going to be a big week. This entire season in the Big Ten basically came down to this game between Ohio State and Michigan. I got to be honest, I didn't see it going this way. I didn't see, Michigan's quarterback being able to effectively move the ball and score the way that they did against Ohio State's defense, but that's exactly what happened. I don't think that the final score is really indicative of how close this game was. Michigan had a couple big runs right at the end in the fourth quarter to really bust it open. But Ohio State, for the second year in a row, drops to Michigan. Michigan is heading on to the Big Ten championship to face the Purdue Boilermakers. And Michigan is obviously in the driver's seat for the college football playoff.
Yeah, I can't. Even I think if they lost that game, I think chances are good that they're in the playoff, given that South Carolina managed to pull the double by not only knocking Tennessee out of the college football playoff, but then turn around and knocking Clemson out of the college football playoff and breaking Clemson's home winning streak in the process of their rival. So credit to Coach Beamer down there to discover something about Spencer Rattler for the last 2 games of the regular season that managed to spoil both Tennessee and Clemson's playoff prospects. Then Oregon had what I think this would be my bad beat of the week, but it would also be the biggest boneheaded coaching plays of the week. So they're up by 21, and they decide to go for it not once, but twice inside their own 20. Fail to get it both times, Oregon State comes back to win. An Oregon State team that had only 6 completions in the entire game. Couldn't move the ball more than 40 yards. So what does the Oregon genius coach do? He decides to give them the ball inside their own 40 3 consecutive times so that they can actually take the lead and win the game. And then fail to score first and goal from the 5 at the end. So that was he deserved that blown opportunity at a playoff, blown opportunity at a Pac-12 title appearance in a Pac-12 title game. Though apparently his offensive coordinator is considered the number 1 prospect to be at Arizona State's head coach next year. Nebraska wisely picked up Matt Rule. That's, I think, going to be that's a natural fit for Matt Rule. That's a natural fit for Nebraska.
You called that a few weeks ago, too.
Yeah, it's the best fit for them combined. Wisconsin, it looked like they were going to pick up Jim Leonard. They let him, longtime defensive coordinator, brilliant defensive coordinator. They really let him be head coach earlier in the season as interim head coach in order to test him out. And word was, before the Minnesota game, that he was going to be announced the head coach on the following Sunday. But then he blows the game to Minnesota, and it looks like it cost him the job because then they go and hire somebody else. So that was a little bit wild. I've said for a while that Auburn was not going to end up hiring Lane Kiffin. It looks like they're not. Lane Kiffin's about to get an extension at Ole Miss instead, as Ole Miss went down to Mississippi State. Ended up that Alabama curse got them. Lost to Arkansas and then their rival at the end to end the season in a kind of wild game, the Mississippi State game. I keep expecting it to be a wild offensive game, and it's always like a weird defensive game with weird plays in between. Tennessee did to Vandy what Vandy deserved. So, that just is what it is. But Alabama managed to dominate Auburn. Interestingly enough, maybe Nick Saban was paying attention to the line because he's hoping for maybe that miracle backdoor back into the playoff. Because the line was 21.5, and with like 2 minutes left, they were up, I think, by 15, I believe it was. And he decides to make sure that they go in and score, which you don't normally see him do. So they win by 22. They get the cover, and maybe he was scoreboard watching a little bit, hoping some voters were scoreboard watching, and he can sneak his way back into the playoff. Given LSU lost to A&M because A&M finally decided to show up for once this season. In their final game of the season because they're not bowl eligible, which is incredible. Top 5 talent,
top recruiting class, right? And they
greatest recruiting class in college football history. according to 24/7 Sports. So but yeah, so I mean, we'll see some of these. We're about to start seeing some other coaches fired and hired. It is interesting that Auburn wasn't going for Lane Kiffin. There was talk that he was negotiating with Hugh Freeze, even though there was a bit of dispute between that AD. When that AD was at Mississippi State, he was the one trying to make sure Hugh Freeze got fired at Ole Miss. So it'd be a little bit of a surprise if suddenly he hires him at Auburn. But apparently Hugh Freeze was looking forward to something because he lost as a 26-point home favorite to the worst team in college football, New Mexico State. So obviously Hugh Freeze had cashed out this season for the Liberty Flames. But, it's going to be a wild finish because if Michigan loses, if USC loses to Utah, if I think Georgia's in even if they lose, LSU's not in even if they win. So the SEC title game is kind of for the privilege of the title at this point. I don't think either one of those. I think Michigan, I think Ohio State has an excellent chance to get back in. The big game to watch, in my view, will be the USC-Utah game in terms of impact on the playoffs, and the other one will be the TCU-Kansas State game. Because I think TCU will not get in as a one-loss team. USC will not get in as a two-loss team. Especially when they lose the title in each one of those. I don't think either Utah or Kansas State can clearly get in. So what happens in those two games will dictate, does Ohio State get in? Does Alabama somehow sneak their back into the back door of the national title? Because right now it looks like they're not that far out of it.
Who do you think is more likely to get in? A one-loss Ohio State team or a two-loss Alabama team who both of their losses were on the road on the last second?
I think a two-loss Alabama team. Now, the X factor will be Ohio State carries so much weight in the voting, the kind of people who make decisions with the AP and the people who sit on the committee. But you have a two-loss Alabama team that, as you know, lost on the last play of the game on the road to two top 10 teams. Ohio State lost by 22 at home against their big rival. And what's their big quality win? You know what I mean? I mean, there's not like that's the problem. Alabama can point to, they beat Ole Miss, and when Ole Miss was a top 10 team, dominating Auburn you can sort of put as a little X factor by, but dominated Arkansas, who has frequently been a top 20 team, will finish in the top 20 this year. Beat the daylights out of them with their backup quarterback. Still held on to beat A&M.
Ohio State's only wins this year are that first game against Notre Dame before Notre Dame fell off the face of the earth and then somehow crawled back into the rankings. And then against Penn State. That's their only wins against anyone of note.
And losing at home, if that had been at Michigan, I think they might have looked at it differently. If it had ended differently, I mean, as you point out, the scoreboard didn't reflect the game. I mean, they had a tip pass for an interception, another interception when they're about to score. I mean, what was surprising to me was Michigan all year had struggled to get explosive plays, particularly out of the passing game, but explosive plays in general. Their great star, Blake Corum, was out. Couldn't. I mean, that also hurts Ohio State's stature. I mean, going in, Ohio State was favored by 8 to 9 points for a reason. And a lot of smart money in Vegas was on Ohio State, was on the Buckeyes. I was on the Buckeyes. And the reason was because without Blake Corum, that Michigan offense hadn't done much all year. And then it goes in and puts up 5 plays of 60 yards or more. And I mean, that's bad defensive game planning by Ohio State. This is the one game you got to play great, and it's the one game you lay a complete egg. And that's coming off a poor game against Maryland the week before. So I am glad that Purdue made it in. I was betting. We had picks out at Sports Picks against Iowa. The money line bet for Iowa to lose and Nebraska to win is a big underdog. That was nice to see because I think Purdue gives Michigan a better game than Iowa gave them last year in the Big Ten title game. But Purdue's a live dog in any game. But I think even if Michigan were to lose that, I think they probably still would get into the playoff because of their dominant win at Ohio State. But it's hard to see Ohio State without a dominant win against anybody, really, that, the best win is against Penn State and Notre Dame. Notre Dame was at home. And was Penn State on the road or was that at home for them?
That was at Penn State, I believe.
That was at Penn State. So that's their one real quality win. Good. And that was a game they were behind in frequently. Can you put them in over – the other factor they all know is they know Alabama's the most talented team in the country, even a little bit more so than Georgia. So they know that, if I'll tell you what Georgia fans are cheering for, they're hoping Alabama's out, and they're hoping Ohio State's out too. because then they're facing teams with a lot less. It will be the least talented playoff competitors, where you have one team that's elite and then a bunch of teams that are good, very good, but not elite. You've always had at least two elite talented teams in the playoffs since they started the playoffs. If neither Alabama nor Ohio State is in that Final Four, I mean, I can already tell you that the odds here was that Georgia was a 2-1 favorite. I mean, that's how big a favorite they were, people making Georgia, if there's no Alabama or Ohio State in that final grouping of four. It's hard to see Michigan doing what they did against Ohio State, doing it to Georgia. It's hard to see TCU's magic run continuing against a team like Georgia. It's hard to see, and USC's defense has proven to be completely one-sided. And we've seen these Lincoln Riley teams that they play fun, they play great, they get into the playoffs, they get whipped by real talented teams because they have no defense. And that's what will happen again in all likelihood.
So as the resident USC guy, Beardo, what are you looking at for this game? Obviously, great performance against Notre Dame. They got the Pac-12 championship coming up against Utah, which is their only loss on the season, albeit at home. What are these USC Trojans going to do?
That loss to Utah boiled down to a few things. Very bad officiating on the part against USC, and then it was a 2-point conversion at the very end of the game. So a very close game. I did have a question for Robert, though, regarding the USC quarterback Caleb Williams. Do you think that the past 2 weeks, as we're sneaking up to Heisman season, do you think that Caleb Williams, after his huge performance against UCLA 2 weeks ago, and then his big performance on Saturday against Notre Dame, do you think Caleb Williams has now leapfrogged C.J. Stroud for the top Heisman candidate? Or if neither of those two, who do you think?
Oh, no question. In fact, I was going to bet on it after Ohio State lost, and Caleb Williams I was going to bet on Caleb Williams, and Caleb Williams is a 10-1 favorite. In other words, you have to bet $10 just to win one, at least the markets I saw. So he has skyrocketed. Nobody thinks there's any chance he could lose. Utah is not a typical Utah defense. If it was, I would be shorting him this week, because I was like, okay, I could see him having a bad game. But this is not a good Utah pass defense. It's unlike any Kyle Whittingham defense I've ever seen. It's just bad defensively. Offensively, still good, but pass defense real shaky. I mean, Oregon State's backup torched him, and so I think USC will get its revenge against Utah. I think they get into the playoffs. Great run by Lincoln Riley. I think Caleb Williams wins the Heisman. I think he deserves to be the 90% plus favorite that he is. A guy like Blake Corum would have been in the running had he not been hurt against Ohio State. Bad luck there. You look at where else. I think Matt Dugan. If Dugan goes out and puts up crazy stats and Caleb Williams completely collapses, that would be the one outsider I would look at as being worth the long shot odds. But these guys that are not on the radar screen before the season starts, and what people need to remember, what I like to call the Heistman, ever since they stole it from Peyton Manning, you could also argue they stole it from Jim Brown, they stole it from Johnny Majors, they stole it from Randy Moss, they stole it from a long range of people. Yeah. You look at who votes for the Heistman, and they're all a bunch of Yankees. They're people who live in states that don't even have good college football. And they're New Yorkers. They
live in states that don't even have football conferences anymore.
Correct. And so that's why when you're betting the Heisman, always look for the media favorites. Look for the Big Ten. Look for the Pac-12. Look, if you're going to go SEC or ACC, look to the South. Look to Florida. Look to big market teams. Look at those programs. Your LSU, historically, your LSUs, your Tennessees. It used to be Alabama, a little less so now because they're so nationally dominant. There's been a shift in the last 10 years in some of that. But when you have a USC quarterback put up great stats and get their team in the playoff when it was unexpected, almost impossible to see him not win the Heisman under those circumstances.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Ryan, I do agree with Robert that if USC ends up beating Utah, I think they make the college football playoff. So
I think they get the privilege of getting whooped by Georgia in the first round. Though I would say this: the one game Lincoln Riley has covered in the postseason, because otherwise I think he's 1-5 or something like that, is Georgia. He actually played Georgia tough that first year that Georgia was in the playoffs. So and if you could see this Georgia offense, we saw it against Kentucky. We've seen it against other teams this year. You could see them sort of going into a shell and not dominating. And that's, I think, the one X factor for Georgia is whether they're off it. If a defense can trick them into going into a shell, it's just very hard to see anybody putting up a big number on Georgia. But if anybody could do it offensively, it would be USC of the teams left.
Yeah, I think that if I were betting, I think TCU makes it. I think USC makes it. I think they both win their games, and I don't think the committee can wiggle around enough to justify getting Alabama in, even though they really fucking want to. And I think we're going to see Georgia versus TCU opening round and Michigan versus USC.
I'll say this. If both TCU and USC lose, watch the committee try to put up both Ohio State and Alabama in the Final Four.
Oh, I could see that. Oof. I could see that happening.
Yeah, I don't think, and I don't even think they'd be wrong for doing so necessarily.
My argument would be, as a Tennessee fan, we got 2 losses. Alabama's got 2 losses. We beat them, so we should get to go over them. Now our quarterback's out, so I would get the committee saying, "You're not the same team." But from
they also don't have the same losses.
No,
quality
that's true.
Losses,
they don't have the loss to South Carolina that we do, unfortunately.
And it'd be one thing if it was just a loss to South Carolina. It was like 30 fucking points or something, you know?
Oh, yeah, 63-38.
Yeah, so there you go. Taker 610 for 2. Muggsy Bogues makes Russell Wilson look short. Maybe. The Greg for 5. Been a while, fellas. UCLA still on the rise. USC will blow it Friday. The only good Trojan is a used Trojan. Fired Chip Kelly yesterday. There you go. Thank you very much, the Greg. Make sure we're good over here on the Streamlabs side, because that is it for us today, guys. That's the NFL. That's college weekend. And we've got a very interesting next week to look forward to. Conference championship weekend. And it's going to be the determining factor for who makes the college football playoff, of course. So that's what we'll be talking next week here on this show, and also what happens in week 13 of the NFL season. Beardo, what do you have going on, man?
Nothing much, man. Just the same. Fear the Beardo on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm still uploading all of my God of War gameplay. So if you don't have a PlayStation, you don't have a PlayStation 5, you're interested in God of War, but you don't have the means to play it yourself, I have all of my story gameplays uploaded onto my YouTube. So go ahead and check me out on YouTube. Fear the Beardo.
There you go. And of course, Robert Barnes from sportspicks.locals.com. Tell people about Sports Picks.
Absolutely. So we also have a second World Cup recap and preview that's up here at Sports Wars. We'll be doing those about once a week for those following the World Cup or interested in it. It's been an eventful World Cup for sure. Greatest upset in the World Cup history. Had some surprising political protests from some surprising nations, not just the English bending the knee, but the Iranians questioning what their government is doing at home. So a lot of interest and a lot of fun in that, and then some wild fans and some great players. So that's been cool. But if you want free information as well as paid subscriber information, you can get that at sportspicks.locals.com. It's the most affordable, most accessible sports handicapping service out there, and one of the most profitable over the last 2 years. This year, profit rate over 60%. Last year, profit rate more than doubled. So it's a place where you can get quality information picks. There's a bunch of other handicappers on the site that give out their picks for free. NHL, NBA, college basketball, World Cup, football, college football, NFL, you name it. And as we enter the postseason for college football, we'll be having a lot of picks up and some detailed videos up on that as well. So feel free to join the community at sportspicks.locals.com to get more information, more intel, and things that can also help line your wallet.
There you go. That's quite the pitch right there. Go sign up for sportspicks.locals.com. Thank you, guys. We'll see you here next week.